Have you ever been asked in an interview, how do you deal with conflict? Did you fumble and not answer it confidently? Or did you learn how to answer this question correctly? Well, then you're on the right show. On today's show on Get Hired, we're going to teach you how to answer that question confidently and correctly. Don't go away, we'll be right back. And welcome to Get Hired. In today's show, we're going to be answering the question, how would you answer? How do you deal with conflict? It's one of the questions that comes up in those interviews. I'm your host, Bridgetti Lim Banda from Cape Town in South Africa. And joining me today are my co-hosts, Aletta Rochat and Teresa Dukes. Our live stream is sponsored by Be Live Media, Get Hired, and StreamYard. A little bit about my co-hosts before I bring them on to the show with me. Aletta is the founder of Voicing Your Potential, and she's passionate about helping people like yourselves speak like a professional so that you can be noticed, remembered, and get hired. She is a certified world-class speaking coach, and she's trained and spoken in 22 different countries, and she's got a proven system to help you get hired. Teresa is a certified world-class speaking coach, trainer, and also a speaker. She's the founding director of Consultants as well as the co-founder of Interview Survival Skills. She helps people around the world be heard, understood, and remembered so that you can present your best and walk away from your fears. Teresa herself has trained more than 30,000 people in effective communication skills. And so, without any further ado, let me welcome my co-hosts onto screen with me. Teresa and Aletta, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So pleased to have you ladies join. Now, this is probably one of the most dreaded questions that I think can sort of, even though most people know they're going to be asked, how do you deal with conflict? I'm sure there's a right and a wrong way of dealing with it. And, you know, what I would want to know, for example, is how do you answer that question confidently without hesitation so that your interviewer knows that you are pretty good at dealing with it and you're not just trying to wing it to get the job?
Perhaps we can start off, Bridgetti, by thinking, why would a recruiter ask, how do you deal with conflict? What are they looking for? And ultimately, conflict is a fact of everyday life. It's part and parcel of any team, any company. It's almost inevitable you will deal with conflict. So they want to know, as a candidate, what is your approach to conflict? Because if you're not good at dealing with conflict, and of course at this point you may not know what level of conflict is already in place for the role or the team that you're applying to join, but they know it's a reality. So they're wanting to know, how would you deal with it? And this question is designed to give them insights into your approach and also to identify any red flags, if there are any, depending on how you answer it. But they want to know for a very specific reason. Teresa.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. And it may also be that the particular job that you have been pulled in for an interview for, it may be that that particular role is going to have to deal with conflict on a day-to-day basis, because maybe the organization is going through a reorganization, or maybe it's looking at changing some key elements of its different stovepipes or departments that it's working in. So they need to know for sure that you have found yourself in a situation of conflict and can actually bring about a positive outcome and not add to the conflict in a way that many people would if they haven't had that experience.
One of the things that I think also are important to realize is there are many different types of conflict, and we'll get into that a bit later. But remember, just on a people level, never mind anything else, there's conflict with your peers, there's conflict with your boss, there's conflict with people who report into you, there's conflict with clients, there's conflict with stakeholders. And each one of those will require a different, maybe approach, a different awareness, a different way of dealing with it. And depending on the role you're going in for, they might be interested in any of those or a specific one of those that's more pertinent to the role.
Is there anything that could lead your interviewer to know that you are already not a good candidate for this position in the way that you answer that question?
Yes, I'm just going to jump right on in there, Bridgetti. If you answer that question in a way that shows them, one, you're not giving them a clear and specific example. You can't convey to them that you understand the different ways of dealing with conflict, or that you say, I'm always fine. No conflict ever happens in my life. Then you will probably not be shortlisted for that next area. So it's really important that you do a lot of soul searching to understand that, hey, this role is going to be high pressure. It's going to be potentially a bit stressful at different times, and be prepared with a clear and precise example of when you have gone through stress and through conflict. And a lot of us don't like to go into the negative sides of some of the things that we go through in our lives, but that's where we learn, and that's where we improve, and that's how we overcome any type of failure that may well have come our way. We can only move forward when we fail.
So is there going to be a difference in how you answer that question, depending on whether you're going to be a team player or whether you are applying for a managerial role that specifically would require you to be adept at that skill?
I think certainly your seniority level will determine your approach to conflict, because if you are a team player, it's not always your responsibility to resolve it. But if you're the team leader, it absolutely is your responsibility to try and resolve the issue, specifically if it's going to impact on your deliverables. So I think when you are applying at a more senior level, they're looking for that insight in terms of how you manage conflict and how you manage and direct and resolve conflict within your team.
So either way, you still need to be able to answer the question.
Yes.
You know, if you're going to be a team player or you're going to be a manager, you still need to know how to answer the question. Should we dive into the did you want to add anything, Teresa, or should we dive into?
No, we dive in. Let's just dive straight in and see what we can get into with more details about how to answer this question.
Absolutely.
So
this is an interesting one, you know, starting with stick to the facts. I think that's probably where a lot of people falter. Who wants to dive into that?
I'll jump in there, Aletta, if you don't mind. One of the things that so many people think they need to do is embellish and try and say that they have done something when in fact they possibly haven't. So it is absolutely imperative that you stick to the facts. Be honest. It's actually all about knowing what happened, what you needed to overcome, how you overcame it, what the results of that was, and then what did you learn from it. So sticking to the facts and keeping the relevant information in there is more important than trying to make it feel like it was bigger than it was. Yeah. So even being able to understand, hey, I had a conflict with a colleague. It wasn't a very big deal, but we still needed to have that conversation to say, hey, I misunderstood you. You misunderstood me. Now let's find a way forward. So stick to the facts.
Do you have anything to add to that, Aletta?
I think the sticking to the facts, what that also implies is that you try and keep your emotion sort of at a minimum for this, because in an interview, you're not wanting the drama of the conflict. He said, she said, oh my goodness, you won't believe what happened. You're wanting to say the conflict was caused by X, and this is the impact it had. So it's a more analytical view of the conflict. Be careful of raw emotion, maybe something that happened last week or resulted in you leaving a position. Those are the types of conflict stories that don't necessarily serve you if they bring up huge emotion during an interview that you have to deal with.
So at the risk of diving into something completely different, would you say that emotional intelligence plays a role here in the ability to stick to the facts?
I think emotional intelligence is a skill that everybody needs to improve. They need to work on it. They need to be aware of it. And it's all about understanding what other people are going through, and then how you can then approach it in a way that will be a positive outcome. So yes, emotional intelligence would definitely play a huge role, especially when it comes to anything that deals with conflict.
So
next we're dealing with processes, issues, and impacts, not people. Aletta, do you want to expand on that a bit?
So there is a very human temptation, especially if you've gone through some terrible conflict at the hands of somebody you don't particularly like at your previous role, to talk about, oh my heavens, you just don't know what kind of boss I was dealing with, and go into the nitty-gritties of this terrible individual and what he or she did or said. And in an interview, that does not serve you well, because for the recruiter, the alarm bells are going off thinking, oh my goodness, they don't deal well with seniority or with authority figures, and perhaps that will repeat itself in this company. So you can rather describe the conflict in terms of it was related to a process that wasn't well explained, or boundaries that weren't clear. The issue was, non-compliance with deadlines or with standards, and the impact that had on a team and on a project. But you do not get personal in the interview and throw somebody under the bus, because that immediately makes you seem like a liability in a strange way, even if it wasn't your fault. The way you describe it needs to be detached, stick to the facts, talk about process, talk about impact, talk about the facts and the data of the conflict rather than the people and the personalities. Teresa?
Oh, totally. And we had a client or a student that was on one of our courses that actually was going through a big hoo-ha at the company that he had been working with previously. And there was major conflict, there was major disagreement, misunderstandings, all of that, and basically wound up having to leave under a cloud. And it was like, his question to us was, how do I deal with that? How do I flip this so that they don't see all the negativity that comes from a situation like that? And what we managed to get him to do was exactly what we said: take the emotion out of it, look at what was going on with the situation, what was happening in your own personal life, what was happening at work, and how you can now explain to that recruiter for the new job exactly what you've been doing in the meantime to deal with any of those issues that allowed you to leave under that cloud. So it's much more about sticking to that process, keeping the issues at bay, and looking at the impact that your actions or the actions of somebody else could possibly have on the company, but don't focus on the individuals, because that doesn't get you anywhere.
That's those are, you know, excellent advice for people to take heed of, to then, just as you both reiterated, stick to the facts, stick to the issues, stick to the impact, and don't get personal. On to the next slide here. How do we analyze the conflict?
This is really part of your analytical ability. The reason you want to demonstrate that you can analyze the conflict is because we want to know that you can learn from one situation and prevent something similar happening in the future. And part of that is understanding what took place. What was the driver behind the conflict? Because often it's not obvious. It might be that someone has felt left out of decision making and therefore there's conflict. It could be that time pressure is just enormous and everyone's under pressure, and therefore things kind of get too rushed and too pressurized. So if you can kind of reflect on what caused the conflict and speak to that, then you can kind of almost analyze, step back and say, well, if I was presented with a similar situation in the future, I would raise alarm bells if I felt that there was too much time pressure on the project, and kind of speak up ahead of time proactively to try and mitigate some of those factors that caused the conflict in the past. Teresa?
Absolutely, I totally agree. I mean, and not analyzing, can't get the word out, analyzing and self-reflection kind of go together. And I know that there was a project I was working on quite a few years back now, where it was that sort of thing. The timescales were really short. We had a big team. We needed to accomplish something in a very small amount of time. But by the time we got to the point where we wanted to deliver the project and the report for what we were working on, there had been no time for communication further afield to happen. And that caused conflict throughout the organization. And it was imperative that we all went back, and me especially, because I was the chair of that particular group, go back and look at what we did, what could we have done differently, what can we now do to take this forward and add more time onto the project itself, and then eventually allow everybody that wanted to have their voice heard, where it was at all possible, to have that chance. And it just meant that you have to accept and acknowledge that you could be possibly part of the problem, but you could also be a part of the solution by helping overcome that conflict when it gets to the, I guess, the stopping point that means, hey, nothing can happen now because we have to overcome this conflict. So analyzing what happened and also reflecting on your part in that will help you come up with that positive solution, and hopefully, be able to tell that interviewer exactly what you did and how you overcame it and what you're doing now in the future to make sure that you don't hit that wall again, or maybe not as quickly. Yeah.
I'd just like to add one
interesting thing.
Yeah, sorry, I'd just like to add one more thing. The word personality is on the slide. And I've been in situations where there's been someone on my team who's what I define as a polarizing character. And you can mention that without literally throwing them under the bus. You can just say, there's somebody in the team who kind of brought out strong emotions with people, and we had to work very hard to get those team dynamics to work. Or we had to take more time to make sure he or she was included, whatever it is. But you can address personality without being personal. So the most important thing is to have an analytical focus, a slightly detached and non-emotional analysis of the conflict, and bring that to your answer rather than any raw emotion.
That's a very interesting one because I think if you don't have the emotional intelligence to cope with it, it's easier to throw people under the bus and possibly not just jeopardize their role in the company, but your own role in the company. And I would imagine that that's a specific skill to that will definitely help you. Teresa, do you have another thought on that?
I do. I just wanted to add that, when you are asked this particular question, you need to have a prepared example. You need to have worked through it. You need to have gotten rid of the raw emotion that is there. Because if you walk into that interview and you go, oh my God, I remember that time I was so upset with my boss, then you're going to go straight into the emotional side of it instead of looking at the analytical side of it. So it's absolutely imperative that you build a list of stories. And I think Aletta and I have talked about this in the past, where you need to have 2 or 3 different examples for every type of question you're going to be given. And, with conflict, you could have a small conflict, a large conflict, and maybe something in the middle. But at least if you have 1 or 2 different stories that you can work on and be prepared and to overcome the rawness, then your demeanor will be more calm. Your answer will be well thought out, and you won't get caught up with all of the emotion and the anger that could be still hidden in there if you haven't already unpacked it. I'm not sure I'm hearing you, Bridgetti.
My apologies. What I wanted to ask is, how much practice would you say it takes to sound confident enough to convey your story in a non-emotional manner? What I'm hearing from you is that I never thought of it this way, that, storytelling can actually help you get a job. So if you've got your stories right and you have the ability to convey them in a non-emotional manner, how much practice would it take? I mean, you can't expect to just wing it and share your story.
No, and Aletta knows that. Aletta knows that by experience. But with how many times should you practice it? How many times? How long does it take to get that story to a point where you still sound authentic and not rehearsed and not scripted? And I think what we encourage people to do is to do what we're doing right now: record yourself. Go online, use your phone, use a platform, Flipgrid, whatever platform you're using that can capture video. Run through different questions that are causing you concern, that you feel like, hey, I need to work on this, and practice your answer. Practice our STAR plus technique that we've shared with you in the past: the situation, the task, the strategic task, the action you took, the result that came out of it, and what you learned from it. And the more you practice that technique and you sit in front of a computer or a video camera, the more you're going to be able to go, oh, that sounded wrong, or that was better, and next time I think I'll start it this way. Yeah, so it will take, a little bit of time and effort. But what a lot of people don't do is they don't say it out loud. And you need to say it out loud so that you can hear the gremlins that are kind of creeping in, instead of the waffle that you really don't want to have there. You want to have the clear-cut story that gets right to the nitty-gritty and shows that you understand what you've gone through, and you're self-aware. And that's a really big part of it. Aletta?
And when it comes to emotional stories, it's an amazing thing. You can write something about something emotional and you think you can handle it. But when you say it out loud, it's almost like the emotion can well up inside of you. So if you have to share a story which is very emotional for you, the more you practice it out loud, the more you get a chance to kind of not be overwhelmed by emotion in the interview. You do all that beforehand by rehearsing out loud a number of times. And by doing that, the emotion dissipates. And if you have to share that same story in the interview, you'll be able to do it well.
Ooh. And it's
Do
not
you
just
recommend people sort of practice with their family members or somebody that they trust?
that's exactly
Dog.
where I was going, Bridgetti. Yes, you don't have to do it just to your own self, just to the screen. You know, practice it in front of people you trust, because you know your loved ones, they will know what you've gone through. So if you can tell the story and keep your emotions at bay, they're going to be able to help you and give you feedback on that worked or that didn't work. You know, I've even had people that take it outside to their garden and they talk to their trees or whatever, because it just feels more, I don't know, getting back to nature kind of thing. But it's like you need that heartbeat out there and that person in front of you that you can say, hey, I know I'm going to be talking to a real person, so let me practice in front of you. Tell me what you think. Have I hit the nail on the head, or am I completely off the mark? So yes, is the quick answer.
Very good practical advice there. Aletta,
Yeah,
so do you want to dive into the next slide?
sure. Thank you. The essence of this, and we've mentioned it before today, is the recruiter is looking to hear what you learned from the experience. So we've all gone through conflict. Having conflict is not a problem, and having to have to deal with it is not an issue. But they're listening with how you dealt with it, what happened, what was the impact, but what did you learn from the experience? And the idea of sharing your learning is saying, well, if I had to face a similar situation today or next week, this is how I would approach it. And it shows that you've taken past learning and you're going to apply it to future situations. And when you reflect on what you've learned, it also gives them an insight to your emotional maturity, how you deal with people, how you approach problems. And it's a very, very powerful thing to share. So be sure to have that ready when you share the stories that you prepared around conflict. What did you learn? Mm-hmm. Teresa?
Yes, and I can remember one of our other students. I think it was Demetrius, who had gone through conflict, and she couldn't figure out. She gave us the whole entire story. She ran through it the way she thought we needed to hear it, and it was pretty much a list. This happened. This happened. This happened. This happened. And then she got to the end where, you know, the result was that the project failed. And then when we nudged her and got her to think about this a little bit deeper, well, what did you take away from that experience? What did you learn from it? What are you never, ever going to do again in the future? The light bulb went on. And that's when she started to come alive. And instead of giving us a list of things that happened, she started to get more into a conversation with us about it and helped us understand that, hey, I realized I came across too hard at that point and I needed to be a little softer. I needed to get in touch with my emotional intelligence, and I will never do that, you know, in the future. So it's just that self-analysis, self-awareness of what you're doing in those situations and how you have learned from it. That's so important, and interviewers are looking for that because they want to know that you're willing to improve. They want to know that you're not just static here and you're going to take the job and do nothing. They want to know that you want to go forward and take the company forward as well.
So valuable lessons there, and just knowing in advance what you're going to say. Be, you know, prepare.
Indeed.
So this is an interesting one. What does your answer tell the recruiter about you? Because obviously recruiters have heard the answers from various people over a number of years, and so they kind of already can preempt what kind of person you are by your answer. Aletta?
This is a really interesting thing to think about, and it's part of what we call developing a recruiter mindset. So if you, for instance, record your answer on a phone, or you do it in front of a trusted friend or colleague, ask them, what does this answer tell you about me? And the insights you gain are amazing. You will often understand what people's priorities are, whether they put the task before the person, how good they are dealing with people. Are they willing to step back and look after each member of their team. There could be so many different things that your answer will tell the recruiter about you. But if you can look at it from the other side and either watch a recording of your own answer or get someone to reflect back to you, you'll start developing that recruiter mindset. And then you'll also start asking yourself, what do I want to showcase with this answer? What do I want to demonstrate? So if it's conflict that you had because there was a personality in the team, what do you want to showcase? If it was about process or time pressure, what would you like to showcase? It might be that you took proactive action. It might be that you took the time to develop a relationship with someone who was not being included by the rest of the team. So think strategically about the job you're applying for and the qualities they're looking for and what this answer can showcase, especially something that you can do that matches what they're looking for. Teresa.
Yes, and that's exactly what I was thinking about. You know, it's so important that you look at that job description, the requirements that they're looking for, the competencies that they see as must-haves, and then when you get this type of question, you're already above. You know, you're already kind of like ahead of the game. And we always have a document that we use with our students that help them understand what recruiters are looking for. So if you've gone through the competencies and you can highlight the different skills or techniques that you use to overcome these different types of conflict, then that's going to help you ensure that you bring that skill to the example that you're trying to share with the recruiter. It's important that skill that you're highlighting is relevant to the company, is relevant to the position that you're going for. It's relevant to the work that you're wanting to get hired to do. So don't give them an irrelevant example. Make sure that you're picking the right skill and the right story to make that point that's on point and on purpose for the job that you're going for.
So knowing your desired outcome is important, and then working back from that to achieve what it is you want your recruiter to know or think about you.
And you've got it at your fingertips. You absolutely do. Get the job description, the interviewer's questions, your stories, bring it all together.
Yeah. So this is an interesting slide. Conflict is inevitable, you know. So are we kidding ourselves when we think that, you know, we'll, you know, I'm a nice person, so I'm never going to get into situations of conflict?
Aletta, go for it.
Yeah, a friend of mine said, you know, conflict is so much part of our daily life that, you know, you can't sit around the dinner table without a little bit of conflict. And for some people, if they don't have conflict by lunchtime, they think they're ill. It's just a part of life. And depending on your personality, you have more or less of it. So don't pretend that conflict doesn't touch you, because no one will believe you. But how you handle conflict and how you can articulate that in the interview makes you stand out as a candidate. And that's why preparation for this question can give you that competitive edge that you're looking for in an interview. Teresa.
Yeah, and you know, I laughed at the beginning when this was brought out, because I know that I was one of those people who had never encountered, as far as I knew, I always steered clear of it, any sort of conflict that was going to kind of come my way. I didn't want to be in the confrontational mode, and that's what conflict does. It makes you become very confrontational. So I always kind of steered clear of it, and until I started taking on more responsibility in the corporate job that I was in. Then I realized that my ideas weren't always ones that people would buy into, and so therefore they would come at me with different ideas, and I would think, wait a minute, that's not the best idea, mine's the best idea. So, you know, conflict can show its ugly head in situations like that. It can even, oh my God, I have 3 grandchildren, and the way they play with toys, you would think it was World War III with the way that they fight over imaginary toys. And you know, this is our life, isn't it? We're here to imagine things and to create our realities. But when we're little, we don't understand that sometimes it's not reality that we're in. We're actually in this little imaginary world, and it's not real. So stick with what's real.
So is this a skill that one can acquire or learn with coaching? Because not everyone is, we're not naturally always born with the tools to help us deal with conflict situations, let alone conflict in the workplace. Can one learn these skills to become more effective if you had some one-on-one coaching?
Absolutely. Conflict is one of those things that we learn to manage as time goes on, but they're very simple techniques that you can follow that can guide you along the way. And I would just encourage everybody, find someone you trust to give you that coaching, because it'll stand you in good stead for the rest of your personal life, never mind career life. It's one of the most valuable life skills that you can develop. Teresa?
And I'll concur, because I know the older I get, the more I realize that there are people out there that have a skill that can help me improve and develop and get better at what I do. And not that long ago, probably about 15 years ago, I finally made the decision to hire a coach. And it was the best decision I had ever made, because it helped me understand things about myself that I hadn't really thought about. And a lot of self-assessment happens. And when you start to self-assess and start to reflect on your situation, your personality, and where you are and where you want to go, having somebody there kind of, give you or pull at you to get information out of you helps you kind of approach things in a much, much more effective way. And you don't sit there in limbo forever, because I know before I had the coach, I just sat there and thought, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And I wasn't getting anywhere. But as soon as I got the coach, everything just started to go.
I'm just wondering, having gone through the pandemic, because, it's caused a lot of issues for a lot of people. And even people I find that were once very confident have lost that because of the often unintended consequences of COVID and the pandemic. And it's been 2 years. 2 years is a really long time. So would you recommend that, or should I say strongly recommend that people look into getting a coach, especially if they're finding themselves out in the marketplace? And also because of COVID, people have found themselves out of work for a protracted amount of time. Are bosses sort of accepting, or employers accepting, that people have been out of the workplace for a long time due to COVID? Or they sort of saying, well, that's not an excuse. How do you explain the, big gap? And can you benefit from a coach to help you answer that confidently?
I think from our viewpoint, absolutely. And our interview survival guide was born during lockdown, and we have helped so many people who are at various stages of their career. And one of the things we teach them is, how do you deal with those uncomfortable questions like, why is there a gap in your CV? And we have a very simple way of tackling it. And what a coach does for you is they take the guesswork out of preparation for an interview, because they've tried and tested methods and they've proven, so they can speed up your learning curve, and they can save you so much time because they're telling you what works. You don't have to figure it out yourself. And remember, interviews are hard to come by. So you haven't got the luxury of messing up an interview and knowing that you're going to have 3 more next week. For most of us, that's not a reality. So we help you get it right. We help you speed up your learning curve, and we work with you every step of the way. Teresa?
Indeed. And, with COVID, yes, in answer to one of your questions, people have kind of gone into their shell, and employers want to draw them out, because they still need individuals who can be effective, even if it's across the screen or more, even especially now that people are starting to get back into in-person meetings. They want to be able to know that this person is going to be effective face to face. So and I work with ages from 14 all the way up to 80 who have gone through, COVID at the moment, and they all say, the more I work with you, the more you give me these techniques, the better I'm getting. And if I had to do it on my own, I could probably do a little bit, but you pushing me and making me do this and making me watch back the video, making me do the video, has pushed me outside of my comfort zone, and therefore means that I'm developing. So anybody who wants to get better and stay employed and even, get that promotion that they want, this is about investing in yourself. And that's what Aletta and I have, that's why we brought this to the table, because we know people want to improve and get better and make more money possibly, or move to a job that they love more. So sometimes it takes a little bit of investment in order for you to get there.
Can I ask a bonus question here?
Yeah.
I was just, listening to the both of you and thinking of conflict resolution, because, hybrid is still the way forward, because I still see, I don't know about you, but there's still a lot of people opting for hybrid, joining companies internationally, because we now know that remote work has become more of an acceptable thing. So my bonus question here to the both of you is, are there differences in conflict resolution techniques or skilled, online versus in person? I'm just thinking in terms of, conflict resolution sort of situation and how you deal with it. Online, you only see people's hands and they can choose to keep their hands down. You don't see them. And you solely reliant on facial expressions, whereas in person you can see the person sort of being their hands, there's some form of nervousness in their hands, or shaking their feet to show discomfort or that sort of thing. So are there differences in how you deal with it? And could that become an interview question? Like, how would you deal with conflict resolution online versus in person?
I think that's an interesting question. And over the past 2 years, we have heard of conflict happening on screen, actual arguments and major disagreements that are going on screen, that are being recorded, that are being live streamed, right? And it's one of the things of our social media today, where you have to approach everything that you do with a professional hat on, especially if you are looking to move up in the company or take on a new job. Having hybrid meetings, you're still going to potentially run into that conflict and that personality clash that could cause problems. But it's kind of like, I look at the teenagers and I know that they still have a bit of raw emotion going on. There are some that are very, very mature for their age, but then I'm looking at some 30, 40-year-olds and I'm thinking, you're acting like a teenager here. We need to get that professional hat back on, so that we show that we are mature, that we can take on conflict, we can deal with conflict and not go to the emotion. We can bring in our emotional intelligence and our cultural intelligence to make sure that we aren't stepping on toes, and that we can have a conversation, because conflict comes down to the fact that somebody has misunderstood each person's point of view. So it's time that, even if that happens in a hybrid meeting or in face-to-face, you still need to find that common ground where you can have the conversation and say, I understand now what you're coming from. If you can explain a little bit more to me, then we can find a win-win solution for that conflict. So, Aletta.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that one of the things that I see people doing that really doesn't help with conflict is when they type about conflict or they text about conflict. You have to have a conversation, and that's not a text conversation, and it's not an email. So you might have to schedule time with that person, even if it's online, to have that conversation about what went wrong. And often it's just people make different assumptions and they have unspoken expectations that they assume the other person gets. So you have to go in with empathy, which is not always easy, and you have to try and understand it from the other person's perspective. And then, as Teresa said, look for the common ground and look for a way forward. Because if you are both going to get just stuck in blaming each other and not finding the next step to take you out of the conflict, then it's a pretty sad situation. But I think in a hybrid world, you've got to learn to connect online, you've got to learn to listen online, and you've got to learn to engage, because it's too easy to turn your camera off when it doesn't suit you. It's too easy to leave the meeting when you don't like the conversation. So you have to be prepared to engage. You have to be prepared to seek someone out and have a conversation, a face-to-face, even if it's a virtual conversation. It can save you so much time. But please, please, please don't type about it, don't text about it, because that really often just gets you lower down the rabbit hole. It doesn't resolve any situation.
Yeah.
Bridgetti.
Teresa,
Yeah.
I can tell you're dying to comment there.
I know. It was just one more thing. You know, we have this real estate here, this little square, and our face fills that square. So remember that when you do have your video on, that eye roll is visible to everybody, or that, you know, be completely aware of what you are doing when you are on screen. It's kind of like everybody's going to see it, and if it's recorded, they're going to be able to go back and watch it. So yeah, be aware of your facial expressions, because they will give away anything that is you know, doubtful in your mind about what's being said.
That there is such a piece of gold, because, you know, if you've spent the amount of time online that we've spent on time, every little nuance of how you come across is captured by the camera. The camera doesn't lie. You absolutely cannot hide emotion on a camera. You know, so be really, really careful of how you, and I think we covered this in one of the earliest shows on Get Hired. You know, don't look distracted, don't look disinterested, even especially in a conflict situation. You do not want to appear disinterested or dismissive of the situation or the importance of the situation. So your camera confidence, which is, I think, was one of the things we covered in one of the first shows, isn't it?
Yes.
Is very, very important, even when it comes down to conflict resolution. Any final words, ladies, before we kind of have to wrap up now? Any final words before we say goodbye?
The one part of the interview you can control 100% is your interview preparation. So take the time, honor yourself, give yourself the best chance possible by preparing for questions around conflict.
And my extra piece of advice there is, when you are preparing, make sure you have 2 to 3 stories relevant to those questions you know you're going to get hit with. Yeah.
Those are absolute awesome notes on which to close our show. So if you've just joined us, please do catch the replay. You were watching Get Hired, how to deal with that awful question. How would you deal with conflict? So if you've missed it, go back and watch the replay. To everyone who's joined us, a special shout out to Lillian over in Switzerland. So thanks, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you back on the next episode of Get Hired.